Welcome everyone to this very special Q&A live stream with Igor Kufayev, live from the very special introduction to Master Training Program. And so without further ado, I'll commence questions. The session will last around 90 minutes and we're taking live questions now. But the first one I've selected is from Angela, and she writes, "Dear Igor, can you expand on what you feel is the motive or driving force behind this collective wave of awakening that is happening nowadays?"
Right. Well, another round of greetings, everyone. It's lovely to be here. It's a beautiful, long summer night at the Gut Saunstorf, where we're coming back every year. It's like a kind of a summer vacation, and we're here on the Summer Solstice. So, reflecting on this question, what else can there be? What else can there be? What is there that is the mover and shaker of it all? So, I don't think really there is much to dwell on this, except that there are evolutionary forces at work. And these evolutionary forces express themselves in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's more obvious, sometimes it's less obvious. We can only know anything in retrospect. In other words, we cannot know anything at the moment that it unfolds. So therefore, to have this perspective, let's say, in terms of what is it? Can you just...
the collective wave of awakening.
So that collective wave of awakening. Do we know if this a unique wave in the history of humanity? Or is it just a continuation of that, let's say, what the waves represent? Waves. If there is an ocean, there are always waves. And so an ocean of being, there will be waves. And these waves of awakening, they keep coming, crashing at the shore of existence at all times. So I don't think we live in time which is somehow more prone for this kind of waves. My perspective is that there is this ebb and flow, rise and fall. Perhaps we are on the upswing, and one should hope so. One should hope that we are now rising in consciousness collectively. So I think that's what I would reflect on this question for now.
Thank you. And as a follow-up question, J. Marie asks, "Dear Igor and team, how can we maximize the potential of the current Saturn transit in terms of our spiritual growth, our personal spiritual growth? I'm currently in the peak phase of Sadi Sati, Pisces moon."
Right. Let's skip that question, because I don't want to take the living from those whose job it is. I'm not an astrologer. It's a fantastic question. And I don't want to just suddenly step on someone else's shoes here. Let's move on to something which is more down to the alley of the work we do.
Okay, well,
that?
The next question we have is from Star, and she says, "How does one know if they are on the right path or forcing their will? Meeting a lot of internal resistance and confusion. Not sure if it's blocks to move through or a sign I'm not on the right path."
Can you read the last passage, just last bit, please?
Yes. So she says, meeting a lot of internal resistance and confusion. Not sure if it's blocks to move through or a sign I'm not on the right path.
It could be both or neither, really. but let's look at it a little bit more attentively. Yes, there are certain distinctive signs that accompany our journey of unfoldment when we're doing something right, when something, the sum total of our input in whatever that is, somehow gives us this sense that we are progressing. So let's not beat about the bush and somehow make it too esoteric. Let's give it a more down-to-earth perspective. Just because it's a spiritual path, it doesn't mean it is different from looking after the garden, right? Or any other enterprise where our input, attention, effort should be visible. So obviously, if something begins to wither, something is not working, then we'll need to look into that. We need to pay attention to what is happening. The gardener examines the state of the leaves, and through the state of the leaves of the plant, he can determine how the roots are doing. But that, of course, takes a gardener. And not all of us, let's say, qualified to be that gardener. So therefore, one would be well advised to find sometimes someone reflecting us that, and I understand that's exactly what this person is doing. But first, like a rule of the thumb, there must be something improving in our life in certain spheres, if not in all spheres of our interaction, as the result that we are truly benefiting from applying spiritual methodologies in such a way that it translates into what? Life lived to its fuller potential. It's as simple as that. Let's not just make it into something, what it is not. It's not at all helpful here to somehow adopt an attitude. So if you enter spiritual life, now all the calamities constantly have to be there to deal with, and that's because that's the way of unfoldment. No, life meant to become easier. So if we establish that, we need to look at the other side of that, let's say. The other side, perhaps less rosy, but also needs to be considered. If our spiritual journey begins to progress, and it advances enough, then at a certain point we dig deep enough when certain things begin to come to the surface. And if that phase is met with clarity, discernment, understanding, acceptance, then those challenging phases would be, effectively speaking, ride through, sail through, just as any other times in life when we were presented with challenges. But whether we are stuck or not, this, again, proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. So whatever spiritual methodology or whatever effort we put into this, if it somehow doesn't smile back, let's reconfigure. Let's look it up again. Let's see, what are we doing here? What can we modify? So I think it's fairly straightforward, I would say. Just really apply common sense.
Thank you for that. So the next question comes from Mabel Luna, and she says, since a deep depression in my early 30s, life has been marked by a collapsed vital energy and blocked creativity. How can one serve and thrive when there is no ecstasy, only depletion, sorrow and blocked longing? Is this too a face of Kundalini? After receiving Shaktipat in India, Kriyas began, but no guidance or sadhana followed. Just a sudden activation and silence that left me disorientated and alone in the process. Thank you, Igor, for holding such a rare field of depth and truth.
Well, it's a biggie one. I'd say this is not to be responded just in a light-hearted manner, since there is a suggestion that some awakening, let alone awakening of Kundalini, took place, and as a result of Shaktipat in India. It would be good to know more, of course, to know more in terms of tradition, let's say, and what other challenges are there. So I would therefore give a bit of a twofold answer, twofold response. One, as a wholehearted invitation to step into our container, because that's the best way. Our containers are known for precisely that, hosting those people who have encountered difficulties on the path of their awakening, particularly when it comes to the energetic aspects. So this is what I would offer first and foremost. If that is not, let's say, an option, then I would suggest to utilize every nook and cranny, every hook, as they say, and look at it from every perspective, from the way you eat, from the way you interact, from the way you nourish yourself. So in other words, first, cover all the aspects pertinent to your physiology. A lot could be said on the importance of nourishment during one's life. For goodness sake, folks, come on. And certainly when we go through the phases of when a lot of pranic forces and a lot of energy literally being drawn out of our bone marrows. So the depletion begins from that level. I'm not saying that for metaphorical reasons. Bone marrow, that's where the nervous system, the structure of the nervous system, all the juices, the most important, let's say, transmission. Bones is the structure where the electricity is transmitted in the body through bones. So it is the structure of the bone itself and a bone marrow then linked to that most precious of all substances, that ojas, that coveted substance, that byproduct of all digestive processes, which is basically consciousness return being consciousness, but in a biological substance. Whatever is being ingested, 28 lunar days, results in ojas. But during the awakening phases, there are phases known as when we literally get depleted in every department. So extra care needs to be taken to prop this up. So that's number one. Number two, of course, one needs to immediately assess the composition of our constitutional setup to see where we are in life in terms of our whereabouts, age, right? Geographically, where do we live, how we live, so as to have clarity with regard to what's at work right now, to understand also the principles that impact our nervous system from behind the scenes. This is why Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. It is a sister science, not for no reason. It shares the same philosophical background in Samkhya. They have the same, as it were, provenance, and perhaps in ancient times were used in parallel all the time. They're still used in parallel now, but at some point, I guarantee there was no split. Every yogi was an Ayurvedic physician to himself, to herself. It's a must. So to find out what is happening there from the level of one's, let's say, constitution, not prakriti, nature. What are the propensities for deviations? What are the propensities that most likely will go out of whack? And then, if we double that with awakening, the life force And what that really entails, that means that the nervous system is under a tremendous assault, tremendous extra strain. So therefore, all complementary applications and therapies should be in place. And of course, this culminates with a proper mental predisposition. So physiology, right? The aspects of what neurophysiology is supported. Then the psychology. That comes psychology. So in other words, proper mental predisposition to understand this, so that with the understanding comes acceptance. With the understanding comes perseverance. So I would suggest to work, this is what I mean, to utilize every hook and crook, that speaking that kind of vernacular. And other than that, of course, it's very important to have support of the environment. There needs to be support of the environment. What do we mean by that? Environment in the sense of keeping company, of people on the path, so that as not to feel isolated, because this process can feel very lonely. I don't know where the person is. I don't know where they're whereabouts. I don't know if it's a householder who went to India and come back, or living in the ashram. I suspect if the person would be living in the ashram, these questions would be answered by someone in the vicinity. One would hope so. So I feel that once this is redressed or addressed properly, then one can ameliorate greatly all this, what present itself as perhaps unsurmountable challenges. But these challenges are part and parcel. One needs to be equipped with proper understanding and guidance.
Thank you. So the next question comes from Buloka, and the question is, does Kashmir Shaivism recognize something like family karma? My father was a butcher all his life, though I have made peace with this, but lately I wonder if his karma is affecting me or why I'm struggling.
Yes, of course, Kashmir Shaivism recognizes the influence that our parents and grandparents, why would it not? Kashmir Shaivism encapsulated into itself everything that was available in India at around the time when these teachings were reformed. Reformed because they were reformation of the more ancient teachings. So that goes without saying that there are many, many influences in our life that come from behind the scenes. And of course, what we have inherited through the epigenetics from our parents, not just through, let's say, the strands of the DNA that the parents carried, but here we speak about also what was passed on in the family line from, let's say, mother to son, mother to daughter, father to son, father to daughter, and so on. And the status of parents, their psychological, mental predispositions at the time of conception, their relational aspects, all this in summary goes. Seasons, phases of the moon, food they ate, company they were in, and so on and on and on. So we are kind of a fabulous conglomerate of all this so-called circumstantial setup. I wouldn't even know where to begin to distinguish what's more important. But I would not blame the father, because it's too convenient, and I don't want to make any move towards anything sounding tongue-in-cheek, or I don't want to make it sound too light-hearted. I can understand this can be a very, very difficult job to reconcile that relationship. So whatever we have inherited, we should always bow in gratitude. After all, because our parents came together, we're here, isn't it not? Can we dispute that?
Mm-hmm.
So gratitude is where we should wake up out of bed. And so the healthy, respectable node, if not bow, at least a node of gratitude towards parents, and then, of course, doing our job, what needs to be done, really, how to reconcile this. How to reconcile it, what do we mean by that? Our job is to reconcile whatever we came here with, whatever we brought here with, to deal with. That's what often addressed as a karmic axis. So each and every one of us have something here that is working itself, as it were, unseen from behind the scenes. And whilst we're busy going about daily life, that in itself here presents us with incredible, extraordinary setup, situation to redress and answer this, what potentially is brought here by virtue of us choosing this life. So let's give that spin as well, that spin of positivity. So it's not like we just accident of nature. I hate to think, this is terrible. I'm going to be terrible now. I'm going to start coming up with jokes. Is there a place for jokes, folks? Please don't take it personally, okay? It's not addressed to anyone, just a joke. Just a joke. So I'm translating it from another language, so you can probably guess which one. So this family of Native Americans sitting in a wigwam, and all the, let's say, young members of the tribe, like kind of giving the background of their names, like sort of, asking parents, Dad, Mom, why did you call me like, White Hulk? Hulk. Oh, because when your mother and father were in amorous embrace, the White Hulk saw the skies. It was a great omen. We called you that. The girl comes. Oh, why did you call me? Let's say, the graceful one. And the answer is given like, because there was something in nature that felt very, very, very auspicious. So you're the graceful one. And then little boy, Mom and Dad, what did you call, why, sort of, what's my name represents, right? And then one of the brothers, or maybe, says, little, just don't even ask, it's not Dad's fault that the contraceptive broke down in the least appropriate manner. I know translated it kind of loses the point, but like, why was I called a broken rubber or something, a broken gum, So we don't want, the point here is to consider for a moment ourselves to be an accident in nature. How about we give it a spin and instead we view our existence here as nothing short of divine providence? Yeah, why not? Against all odds, against all all circumstances. I'm here. And gratitude always goes to the sum total of what brought us here into this embodiment. And let's make the best out of it, the best we could. So what does it matter what type and what kind of karma came from my father, from my mother? I'm here to transcend it all. I'm here to transcend it and to rise to my true status, which is not of father, not of mother, not of grandmother, not of grandfather, the true status of who I am. And that goes beyond any strands of DNA. So how about that for change?
Thank you for that beautiful response. So the next question is from Iskam. After a brutal car accident, my Kundalini process, or likely Pranatana, almost completely stopped. Following a profound evolution of consciousness, I descended into 5 years of living hell. In the Kundalini process, can a period of psychic opening and release of material from the chakras be followed by a regression of consciousness and a stagnation of flow when the energy hits a block?
I hear this, I feel for you, whomever these questions belong to. One would not wish anyone to go through this. I feel it's like a sharing. So where is the inquiry? What are we asked to respond to? Are we invited to detect the question in the sharing? Could it be that car accident or any event can arrest, let's say, the unfolding of consciousness? Yes, it could create certain numbness, because the jolt from the experience could freeze the system, simply put the nervous system into that state where, unless it releases that, like all the PTSD cases are known for that, when we go through life-threatening experiences. And it's very important to distinguish any stress and truly life-threatening experiences. Our system freezes. And that frozen moment, of course, can send these shock waves deep into the system. So it's not that awakening stopped. It's not that the process in itself stopped. It's not that, let's say, Kundalini reversed or pranic movements reversed, right? But it's more of a responsiveness of the nervous system in that state of shock still. So therefore, what would be advisable here is simply go into therapy consciously to ameliorate the impact of the PTSD. Potentially, that's what the nervous system is suffering from right now. So that shock needs to be dissolved. It needs to come to the surface again, either through re-experiencing this, so it's then reintegrated, or whatever the modalities out there. But just not doing anything about this, hoping that it will go, it might not. So whenever we go through some of these experiences, I say, and I never against applying therapeutic applications. In this case, skillful, informed counseling, ideally with those who understand also the energetic nature of the process that the questioner went through.
Thank you. So our next question comes from Andreas, and he says, I live in Berlin and was diving really deeply in the subculture of free love, so-called conscious sexuality, the spiritual supermarket, and also psychedelics and satsang for 20 years. How is it, he asked then, how is it possible to leave a life of spiritual hedonism behind, especially if there are many old patterns leading towards it, in a way avoiding the next phase in life, and make a clear step towards taking responsibility in life for work, partnerships, family, money, etc., the earthly things, and build up a life that is simple, clear and stable, while the world around us becomes increasingly unstable.
Take action. Simple as that. Just write yourself all these things that are written now so well, right? Like bullet points, right? Can we read those? Like those qualities that are addressed as missing and want to be regained, right? Could you please read them? Those qualities. Family life.
Yes. So so we have so responsibility in life for work,
Responsibility in life for work.
for partnerships.
Let us slow down. Okay. Now let the person write it down for themselves. So responsibility for one's own life. Okay. Pause. Write it down as a mega bullet point. Okay. What action am I prepared to take? Next, please.
For work.
For work, what am I prepared to do? What action am I taking towards that? And the third one?
Okay. Partnerships.
Partnership. Do I want to be alone, lonely wolf, howling on the moon, or I want to share my life with someone and enjoy it greatly? Yes, if the answer is yes, not to the moon, not to the howling, but to the partnership. What am I prepared to do? What am I prepared to sacrifice in all my indulgences, in all my, let's say, habits that are now screwed into the system? Let's carry on. Let's do this job for the person. Let's just,
We'll do it. Okay, and a related point, family.
That goes also maybe as a subcategory of the partnership, right?
Yes, and then money is after that.
It's all related to work, right? So actions. Okay.
Yes, and then they summarize it with the earthly things and build up a life that is simple, clear and stable.
Beautiful, simple, clear and stable. Don't we all want that? Write it down, man, or whoever wrote that, woman. Write it down. Make this into your intention, unwavering intention. Just as you expressed yourself here, eloquently, clearly. And after every single bullet point, there have to be what actions am I prepared to take? And start taking actions. There's no other way. It's more simple than it sounds. More simple. Yes, of course, we can start going all this minutiae of it's impossible. It's impossible. Everything is impossible until it becomes possible. And how things become possible when we take action. And action can only be taken when we face the responsibility. That's what they say, smell the coffee and do the job. Thank you for a good question. Truly.
Thank you. So the next question is from Destiny. And they write, good evening, Igor. It is common for someone to experience a full thunderous Kundalini rising, exiting at the crown and causing union with the surroundings, and then later followed by a gradual process, kriyas, mudras, and gradual refining of the energy circulation, leading to bliss and samadhi during meditation. So they're raising that as a question. Is it common?
So in other words, if I understand correctly, maybe you can just,
yes,
like if there's a cadence in the question, like if the cadence in the way. So is it possible, let me reiterate it back, that there is a fully blown awakening, right? And I presume ascent of Kundalini, and then
a gradual process with kriyas.
Kriyas.
Yes.
Interesting. There are, of course, cases when Kundalini can awaken and shoot up very, very fast in a violent manner. Violent, as traditionally that term used, right? Gradual, intermediate, and violent. There are cases of that, and of course it's all down to the status and state of the neurophysiology and the accumulated information, the emotional body and astral realm. So this is more rare when Kundalini would shoot up like that to pull up, let's say, to the abode, and then return and begins to do the job. In other words, sending resonance throughout the neurophysiology, throughout the whole network of all the nadis, pathways, where it will prompt the prana to display itself in the variety of the phenomenology that we in our language call samavesha kriyas, right? These kriyas, movements, mudras, right? Yes, but it's more rare. Why? Well, clearly why? Because the phenomenology of these movements, this involuntarily display, is because the awakened Kundalini now sends the much finer resonance throughout the entire network. The resonance is so fine, so refined, that it pushes pranas into the domain where prana has never traveled before, never streamed through before. And if these pathways are open, there will be no obstruction. So it will just keep expanding in every way, in every dimension. But as soon as it will meet with some obstruction, it will begin to shake, tremble the body, and body will start adapting to that. The whole body, not just the physical body. And this process of adaptation is so that the body can hold greater and greater amount of prana. It is paramount, because the expansion of Kundalini is inseparable from the expansion of prana. It's obvious. Moreover, and that's why we're making an emphasis in the work that we are hoping to publish this year, this outcome of many, many years, and which gave rise first to the Kundalini course for the online studies, and now it will be released as a book. Special emphasis is given to clarify the relationship between Kundalini, which is consciousness, and the movement of pranic currents. So this is an interesting thing here. Although Kundalini is the goddess, Kundalini is consciousness, it cannot forgo the way Kundalini descended as prana Kundalini to create this world, this reality, these chirping birds, trees and planets, and us sitting in this room and so forth. Obviously, this neurophysiology, this experience of here and now in the body. So it cannot forgo all these streams that were streaming, cascading down. In this cascading down, it created this pranic, through the pranic network, this underlying reality of the subtler domain, made out of the countless pathways of energy. And they remain dormant until there will be a returned movement, that ascent, where the pranic currents will go through all these nadis again, reviving them, revitalizing them. However, Kundalini, and this is what we mean now, repeating ourselves again, cannot forgo this. It cannot just go haywires, or I will go here, I will go there, I will prefer this path. It will only go through the channels that are available, pathways that are available. And not only that, it will be at the mercy. Kundalini, will be at the mercy of pranic forces that perform all the housework here, all the duty, all 5 pranas, the major 5 pranas, prana, udana, apana, vyana, and samana, all of them will be here in charge. For example, just to give an example, Kundalini may awaken, but if udana, the force, upward force, is not strong enough, what will take Kundalini up? So there is this intricate correlation between how Kundalini, imagine Kundalini is this goddess, she's the queen in her own palace, right? But she needs to be carried, taken care of. And it's performed by these, let's say, Fräuleins, that the nearest, the dearest to her, right? She honed them, trained them, right? They are under her command. But they are the ones who will do that, let's say, where Kundalini will become a rising Kundalini. So that correlation between Kundalini as consciousness, because there is still confusion that we experience Kundalini. We cannot experience Kundalini. We cannot. What we experience is the phenomenology. Kundalini experiences itself. Consciousness experiencing itself. There is no regression for Kundalini to have someone who is experiencing her. One can say, well, isn't Shiva experiencing Kundalini? Well, actually not, because Shiva is Shakti, and this is Shakti. Shakti is consciousness now. So what we experience instead is the phenomenology of all the movements, of all the pranic currents, all these electrical impulses, tingling sensations, movements, shake-ups, changes in temperature, changes in the psychic responses, all these metamorphoses, psychosomatic metamorphosis, is due to the pranic activity. So, in the cases that were here, yes, we don't want to say it's impossible. There are rare examples when Kundalini will rise instantaneously, but the only speculation here, whether it has really risen to its abode or it was experienced as such. And there's plenty of ways we can mistake that process, simply because in the cortexes, everything experienced electrically. In the cortexes, everything experienced electrically. So therefore, there might be, I'm not suggesting that's exactly what happened. There may be a strong movement down here, anywhere in the lower chakras, but it's accompanied by the blinding lights in the head. And we often erroneously take this for Kundalini entered the highest abode. Every experience here registered and made available and possible through that, what the cortexes here represent, through synaptic connections. I mean, from the synaptic connections down to this, what is exemplified here by the paraphernalia of what Kundalini process is inseparable from. So.
Thank you. So the next question comes from Steph. And you say, I feel like I live between 2 realms. My ordinary life with ego and responsibilities, and a subtle awareness of oneness, synchronicity, and the collective field. What guidance do you have for truly mastering the spiritual path and uncovering one's gifts, especially as a healer, while staying rooted in integrity?
Can you just read that last one?
Yes. What guidance do you have for truly mastering the spiritual path and uncovering one's gifts, especially as a healer?
Healer.
Yes,
Okay.
as a healer, while staying rooted in integrity and becoming a clear instrument of God. They go on to say, how can one embody this vessel-like quality, yet remain functional and responsible in daily life? And they conclude saying, also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how some of us misuse non-duality to bypass healthy values and ethics, claiming that because everything is love and oneness, moral conduct doesn't matter. So several parts to that question.
Yeah, so very relevant, very, very actual, very, as they say in Los Angeles, on the money. Well, maybe we'll start in reverse mode. Start with the last bit, right? The role and place of, right? What is it?
So to
values, right?
Misuse non-duality to bypass healthy values and ethics, claiming that everything is love and oneness and moral conduct doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know that that's not true. We know that the health of the psychological container, which is all based on how attuned we are to the internally built, inbuilt moral compass, is by far more important than the state of our physiology. Let this be made into an inquiry in itself. Let's ponder on that. The state of our psychological maturity is more important and will always be more important when it comes to this. I mean, come on, even the work of likes of Rudolf Steiner, the founder of that system of Waldorf schools, he spoke about this all the time and developed his own system. Certainly he was versed with Oriental philosophy and metaphysics enough to implement it into the complex work of his own in terms of the absolute necessity in changes in educational system, so that we can not just equip people, generations of people, with certain skills, with information, but first and foremost, equip them with the complexity of what it means to be human being. So this is where we should begin. And he was standing simply on the shoulders of those who have been saying that for millennia, emphasizing the importance. Not that unless one fully covers the code of conduct exemplified by, let's say, classical Ashtanga yoga, by yamas and niyamas, that one can then proceed to the next limb of yoga. That would also be obviously inconsistent, because these limbs of yoga exist simultaneously. It's not like a ladder that often, mostly in the past, has been misinterpreted that way, in the form of a ladder that you climb that Ashtanga yoga from yama to niyama to eventually you can experience samadhi. No, all of these limbs, just as limbs, if we speak about that in relation to human body, develop simultaneously in the fetus. In the fetus, all is developed simultaneously from more simple forms, more primitive forms, which resembles the basic life forms. As it goes, it becomes more and more and more human, already in the womb of a mother. And then this process can be also seen in relation to the psychological maturity and the phases of life we go through in terms of that maturing into who we are. So the job is here to become human. And if the job first and foremost to transcend human. Without this, let's say, without addressing, redressing, and in some cases requiring some considerable work, then what we will end up is beings of tremendous dissociation for themselves and for the society. I don't want to just suddenly go into that preaching mode, because it's too easy to talk about it, frankly, because it's been spoken so much about, there's a language developed for that. But this is fundamental principles of how this pyramid is built, how everything rests on that. It's an architecture of, let's say, awakening itself, the process of awakening. Yes, in our day and age, there are examples of, let's say, how things go out of whack all the time. System backfires. What we expect to behave in a certain way doesn't. I'm not going to go now into the outcome of what the shortcomings of our education now cost us as a humanity at large, because it's a vast subject. Because Rudolf Steiner and alike people of his generation, people who saw that the system of education needs to be radically changed, unless if we don't change that, then we will have cataclysmic proportion of how future generations will be faced with what we are collectively faced with. So it goes even, I would say, it goes at the educational level in terms of how important it is to have proper understanding of these values. So these values also, of course, go hand in hand with unfoldment of consciousness, but not always the case if one is trampolined into the finer recesses, not enlightenment, let's say, in that classical sense, where everything is lit with the light of one's own awareness to such degree that there's knowledge simply dawns. And like, instead of the rose petals and manna falling down, right? A progressive download of this, what could be spoken of as foundational, fundamental qualities, literally experienced as a download, like a kind of one begins to feel how one's being is structured in these values. These values are eternal. They're like this, therefore, in the term Platonic values, because they're constant. Platonic values and Platonic constants, right? They're often spoken of interchangeably. So that's psychological values and constants in the sense of geometrical structure. I'm not going to just go there because it will take us much more time than we have on our hand, but there is a direct correlation between that beautiful sacred geometry and these psychological values. So something to be said, how that what is displayed here as the marvel of symmetry, which contains in itself, like in the tetrahedron, all the laws of nature contained in itself in that geometrical proportion, in that proportion that it holds. In the same way, the psychological values are held at the point where all these values spring forth from awareness. But this, of course, is the ultimate picture of reality, and to bank on this or to consider this to be a, let's say, that would be applied to every, let's say, human being is a big mistake. And a lot of spiritual movements made that promise that with the expansion of consciousness, let's say, stick to meditation and that will make a fantastic individual. This is not always true. Why? Because of that repository of what is there in the psyche in the first place. So, yes, maybe for again, that example of renunciates. The renunciate, what is there to work on? Walked out on life. Of course, question would be asked, why someone walk out on life? Because one doesn't want to cope with life, or because one's calling to divine in that particular way of understanding is so profound that they forsake everything for that goal. Okay, fine. We should not really have this kind of our perspective projected on how this can pan itself out with someone else. However, and this is where it becomes more complex, many of us prone to prefer philosophical platforms, spiritual teachings, because it absolves us from any work on ourselves. It's simply a legitimate cop-out from anything that otherwise causes discomfort. And that's exactly why I brought Rudolf Steiner, because he spoke about it with crystal clear clarity with regard to that we meet that archetypal entity, if you will, right? That encounter, archetypal encounter, maybe entity will be confusing for some. Only when we have done some considerable spiritual work on ourselves and there are distinctive breakthroughs. At that time, these archetypal encounters present us with the full gamut of what otherwise was neatly hidden beneath it all. This is the iconic encounter of Buddha towards the end of his sadhana, when he was practically one step away from Buddha, when all the demons and makaras were tempting him. This is the last temptation of Christ. This is in every culture, is very well known. It doesn't happen to us from the moment we close our eyes in meditation and we face our demons. No, not at all. So, of course, if we do not address this, if we simply somehow glide at the surface level of it all, sooner or later, that encounter, that archetypal encounter, will come to test us. And that's where many cannot withstand that test. Because it's painful. I've done all the spiritual work. I even had fireworks. I'm already teaching. I'm already out there, guiding others. And suddenly this comes and presents itself. What then? See? So therefore, why Rudolf Steiner and educators as him are very important, because they emphasize the value of a proper build of foundational, to properly build a foundational ground upon which we can always rise. It creates that unfallible ground. We can always rise from that. Even if we fall onto it, we fall on something solid. And this is why the non-dual teachings are in essence shallow, because they're lacking of that dimension. Just by focusing on so-called awareness, or being aware of aware, and realizing that I'm aware now and have always been, and that's all there is, because that's what it is, that will suffice. Well, apparently, it is not. And not only for this method of inquiry. One can be a progressed meditator and still not encountering this. That is my path. I speak from direct experience. Meditation was icing on the cake. Twice a day, out of meditation, refreshed, renewed, creative, fluffy, ready for my day. cup of green tea, sky's the limit. In the evening, tired, sit down, cross your leg, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, come out refreshed for the evening now, ready for everything that life brings, throws at me. Beautiful. Little did I know that this was just a kindergarten, even though I thought already, oh, wow. No, when all this stuff starts to come out, all the cupboards opened, and all the Michael Jackson dun, 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 dun. Or was it the, well, whatever. You know? Thriller, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I don't know what else to say except start dancing.
You've
now.
got me there. Yeah. Okay, well, perhaps we go back to the first part of that question. So if you, they asked, what guidance do you have for truly mastering the spiritual path and uncovering one's gifts, especially as a healer, while staying rooted in integrity and becoming a clear instrument of God?
Okay. If this is written sincerely, and I have no reason to doubt it is, it already at work. Nobody who want to bypass this writes this. So I don't want to deflate your inquiry, or I don't want to like kind of pat you on the shoulder, but whenever someone expresses themselves like that, one is less prone to worry than when people just, all this is covered, I'm in the next stage. Next stage is what? Mars? Jupiter? Oh. Next stop? I'm paraphrasing. So inquiry itself shows this refinement. It shows, it brings it out into the open. So my only encouragement here, what advice, right? Advice is asked, is to simply, first and foremost, because also the whole, let's say, inquiry started somewhere with the ego, that part maybe.
Yes, they started, I feel like I live between two realms, my ordinary life with ego and responsibilities, and a subtle awareness of oneness, synchronicity, and the collective field.
Okay, thank you. So I want to just maybe reflect on that. This in itself is already where everything is hidden. So that ordinariness of everyday life with all the so-called demands of the ego and the subtle awareness of the higher reality. This in itself is what we are and why we're here. Ego here is not our enemy. Okay, let's say something, the most blasphemous sentence of this evening. Ego is not even our friend. Okay, let me carefully phrase this now, because it will ruffle quite a few feathers out there. It is because of ego there is this gift of individual existence, gift of individual experience. In reality, ego is nothing other than the very, very self in the state of its identity with the body-mind. That's all there is. And that is not a crime. So, sooner or later, the true wisdom dawns when life meant to be lived at that level. At that level. This is what the price for diversity. The price for diversity is this. This. Without ego, there is no diversity. It begins deep in the strata of manifestation, as we've been unpacking this past couple of days here in the setting of this program. so that we can see the locus, the seat. So we understand ego is not an entity in its own right, but activity in consciousness. And because of that activity, like that diaphragm that contracts and expands, makes something sharp and something blurry, it can get very little light in or a lot of light in. There are points required for just enough light, and so the beautiful image can be captured. And that is what this really is that tuning of the diaphragm, so that what we speak of, that egoic awareness, is that constantly in motion, and we are in charge of that. That's where the mastery is. So that it's not rigid in either way. It's not stays rigid. So ego can contract and expand, just as our sense of self contracts and expands on a daily basis. And we bring eventually these, what seems like polarities, into a unison, into such beautiful level of frequency of balance that it is enough to enjoy this life for what it offers, enough to enjoy the subject-object dynamic, so it doesn't comes at the very heavy price of being robbed of the essence of who we are. So it's just a graceful walk, really. So the inquiry itself already filled with that understanding, otherwise that inquiry would not come in the first place. So that all I could say in a given moment in time, really.
Thank you for that beautiful response. So the next question is from Jesus' son Juan, and they write, "Dear Igor, is in your teachings top-down awakening considered? What's your point of view on that? Most people seem to experience top-down awakenings rather than Kundalini awakenings."
Top-down rather than Kundalini. I want to take this question seriously, although of course there are plenty of temptations to speak about something else, right? Like, do we start dressing in the morning from putting on a hat? Maybe some. Might look fun. A cowboy hat, and the rest is negligee. Tongue in cheek. But, sometimes the wise guys have a different approach. As long as you're fast and furious, you can miss the target. Yes, I've heard this many times in the past. Our dear Adyashanti, who worth his salt in every way and respect, has somehow brought this model even. He made it into a model. Head awakening, heart awakening, gut awakening. And that kind of took flight, took hold. I start hearing, and we're talking about folks long time ago, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And suddenly already like this is being used as the reality of the situation, as this language. Head awakening, heart awakening, gut awakening. All right, let's look into this. And I understand why Adya came up with that. And I understand why it also took hold for various reasons, including all the wrong reasons. Because what happened is a superimposition of the subtle processes onto anatomy. So calling it head awakening and thinking in terms of, let's say, reverse of that, what in the inquiry he has spoken of as top-down versus Kundalini awakening. We've covered this many times, by the way. There are many videos out there when we speak about descent of grace and ascent of Shakti. Please Google this and just one name, Igor. You don't even need to add my family name, and you'll see all the entries out there. ChatGPT will shower you with examples. There are plenty. We dealt with this over the years. There is no ascent of Kundalini without descent, because these are complementary movements. I'm not even going to go there because I've covered it many times. I've covered this in every darshan dedicated to Kundalini. And so let me just go back maybe and revisit that model so as to do what I've done already, but somehow we never published this. I bust this model already as far back as Vancouver Immersion, circa 2013, más o menos. Oh, there's a Spanish name, más o menos would be understood, right? That model here is confusing, and I'm not holding Adi accountable because he meant something else, but it was superimposed on the anatomy, physical anatomy, literally. Even traditionally, we can speak about it. The first stage in realization is manopaya, manana. It's that at the level of manas, mental realization. All realizations are first mental, by large. It's like grasping the concept. Grasping the concept. The father speaks to the son before, when he's still a virgin, do's and don'ts, this and that. That is mental initiation and mental realization. He will then go and learn how it works in actuality, where all that, quite frankly, will be reconfigured in light of new understanding. And of course, in a traditional setup, it's the first step. The first unfoldment begins from there. Now, going back to that model, head awakening, heart awakening, and then gut awakening. This does not progress at that level. What is related here is perhaps, I'm not insisting, perhaps, spoken with regard to that first mental realization, when we truly grasp the concept, that may be accompanied by intellectual insight. Usually that is the case. And then mind organizes it somehow. That flash of intellectual insight and mind will make sense out of that. So let's say, fine, we can call it head awakening. It doesn't mean that it is actually works in a descending manner here. Then comes heart awakening. What Adya meant, most likely, I'm not here to interpret his teaching, but I've heard people, including those who studied with Adya, going on their own and making a mess out of this. Heart awakening here represents simply a refined state where the awakening reaching that level of the heart, effectively speaking, the emotional body. So first mental realization, followed by a more refined processes where the emotional body starts to reverberate. So in other words, it's closer to somatic, but yet not somatic. It's still feeling drawn. Finally, in Adya's language, gut realization or gut awakening, which he, in his expositions, claims to be the deepest one. That's where the real deal is. Because in his training, in his school from where he comes from his tradition of Zen, that gut represents here special, let's say, place. In Zen, like in all, let's say, Buddhist traditions that somehow went through China. This is associated with a place known as, and there are several terms, one of them known as Dan, right? What is it called? Tan. I forgot now. And Hara. And that corresponds to the seat also. This is where actually the mental faculties reside at the level of what would correspond in yogic tradition of Manipura, the city of jewels, the Manipura. So in other words, that in China, in Chinese tradition, in Taoism, there is an expression that we think here, not here. And now we come to the realization, even in neurophysiology, neuroscience, that we don't think in the head. Head is a place where all neural activity takes place in terms of synaptic connections. We spoke about it earlier today and even in response to one of the inquiries. So, in other words, the brains themselves represent this kind of instrument of where these firing responses are registered. But the actual fullness of cognition takes place elsewhere. And in perhaps Adya's model, the progression here, in terms of not the linearity of top-down, but in terms of what it represents in what departments are fully involved in the process of awakening. And yet, many teachers somehow speak of it in that vertical sense of descent and counter that with Kundalini awakening, very often even insisting that is as an alternative to Kundalini awakening. It's a total nonsense. Just read the yoga's letters on yoga by Sri Aurobindo. He beautifully speaks about these complementary movements as well, in an accessible English language that he was unparalleled among Indian teachers in terms of the power of self-expression. He was trained in England, educated in England. It's a bit Victorian, perhaps for modern people's taste, but letters on yoga written very, very directly and simply, because they were responses to people's questions. They were not like written works of his. They were written in the form of letters. And this process of descent and ascent is spoken clearly here, also spoken in three-way manner. The Shaktipat is always descent. The receive of grace is always downward movement. It's a downward movement where the guiding force here is actually that of apana. So the grace deserts with apana. And then it sends enough propensity to awaken the dormant life force, which then begins to resonate. And if that resonance is strong enough, because in Shaktipat, resonance can be experienced over a prolonged period of time. It can be instantaneous, which is more rare. It can take weeks, days, or it can take years until that resonance reaches the momentum where it will propel that force to expound from its, what traditionally spoken of, allegorically coiled state of slumber. And then the ascent begins. And when ascent is completed, it is accompanied by a repose in the centers. I'm kind of going into now really more detailed process. So let me just give it a more sweeping overview. So ascent, out of necessity, would have to be accompanied by another descent. See, so that's the fullness of the picture. Descend, ascend, return. Okay? Other than that, please don't take it personally, like wearing a hat, standing naked in front of the mirror. No, put, right? Beautiful, clean underwear, and start building from down up.
Thank you. So the next question comes from PB, and they write, "Dear Igor, what influences the duration and intensity of Pranatana? Is the degree of how contracted we are an important factor? Can Pranatana occur for years or decades, or perhaps even lifetimes?"
Yes, it can, of course. Yes, it's pranic activity. So, yes, of course, it can take as long as it can take. So, I don't know what else. Let's look for what's in that inquiry.
Well, they began with what influences the duration and intensity of Pranatana.
Duration and the intensity of Pranatana.
Yes.
Psychological predispositions. That's what influences above all else. Psychological predisposition here is of primal importance. So that Sanskrit term tapas, which has a beautiful English term ardor. So tapas is a spiritual ardor. And spiritual ardor is not just wanting something badly. It's not. It's literally burning with something bright. See? It's not wanting something. Wanting something could be very, very dull and dark, viscous and tamasic. Burning bright. See? So it's already luminous and in a way resembles in itself, because it is a spark of consciousness, now illumines the furthest corners of one's being, of one's heart above all else, with certain longing. So therefore tapas considered to be the most important prerequisite, at least as far as Indic spirituality goes. So the term ardor, tapas, there are these few words that comprise the core of what in that particular part of the world emphasis has been made over and over and over. So the intensity of that psychological predisposition, it doesn't come from wanting something, because whenever we want something, there will come a day when we no longer want this. Right? The desire to have something doesn't last forever. It doesn't even last too long. It will be replaced by another desire. There will be obstacles, obstructions, and it will result in some disappointments, anger, frustration, and another set of desires will be created. And that desire will be driven under the ground, so as to resurface again, as that it will create very strong repository, which will begin to reverberate, determining the full setup for the next incarnation, if you believe in one. Tapas, on the other hand, is unwavering, simply light into itself. So it's this burning, and it can be like a glow. It's not combusting all the time and creating the, blackout, fuses going. No, it can be just that glow, that inner warmth, that sense that gives direction to our life. That inner direction, irrespective of where light takes us. So that is what determines the intensity and duration of how the process of Pranatana will, let's say, we experienced. And then, of course, secondary to that, but nevertheless still important, is what is there accumulated that need to be melted down out of the system. Or in another way to put it, maybe more accurately, to be metabolized. So Pranatana, as a preceding awakening of Kundalini, is the process of healing of a psyche. And healing of a psyche, of course, is reconciliation of all sorts, realignment, continuous realignment. Something is aligned here, and then it can be realigned elsewhere. And then the these phases, until it creates a more balanced environment, much more balanced, and also strengthening both the emotional body and the astral body, the subtle body per se. It strengthens it, so that when Kundalini awakens proper, it will withstand that expansive movement that Kundalini would generate. So that consciousness will expand, explode, and it will rush through myriad of streams, and these streams are no longer clogged. So the whole system is irrigated with pranic flow. So it's beautiful to observe. One receives nourishment from something else. The body glows. One literally has this glow to it. It's unmistakable. So really, other than that, of course, the duration intensity is determined by various factors, but I would suggest that quality here, that psychological predisposition again, is what creates that internal propensity for enough energy to go there. Because, let's face it, we have all the apertures from where the energy oozes out constantly. Constantly. When we look at something, it oozes through the sense of eye. When we hear something, it oozes itself through all the apertures. And the yogic process really is a realignment of prana, so that enough prana is generated for internal processes. Not that we want to shut our eyes, ears, and all the apertures to the world, no. But we need to have, this is a balancing act. I don't know how you folks doing it this day and age. I mean, I'm really, really don't. Because I don't even know how it would have been. There was nothing to scroll, nothing to be aware of all the time. There was a crackling telephone machine and the messages left. And you would leave your message, and I'll reply to you when I can. Thank you. Beep. So much more time for oneself. See? But that's the reality. So one needs to find a way. Find a way. Because we are not embedded with unlimited amount of prana. Modern people, us, we're not. So this, therefore, needs to be this equal distribution, where the prana internalized can do work, so that we can still enjoy life out there with the loved ones, through interactions. Not going to put blinkets on our eyes, right? To reduce start selling special glasses. Maybe a line called "Preserve Your Prana." Tint your shades to 50%. The rest goes straight into your spinal cord as an elevator to the ultimate reality. 10% for subscribing. Off.
Okay. Well, I see that we've actually come to the end of the live broadcast now at 9:30. We do have one more question so that we could potentially go through if we have an opportunity.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. So this is from Nesreen Azam, and she writes, I am a single mum, 49 years old. I come from an Islamic background in Egypt. I wasn't a seeker. I only loved art and literature until a sequence of events led me to my first teacher. I received Shaktipat in an unforeseen way. I experienced bliss and I tasted the integration and what was missing from my path. I don't know where I am. Sometimes I am everything and nothing, and sometimes I'm just scared and lonely. I don't know how to be stable in my realization. Thank you for everything you do. So I think there was more of an implied inquiry.
Well, I don't know. The most obvious thing would be to suggest and ask in turn. In fact, it's interesting, these examples of people receiving Shaktipat. Shaktipat is a serious thing. Fully assisted Shaktipat, it's a serious thing. So what is the accountability? And do people receive this in what circumstances and what settings? I'm just curious, I'm just wondering. It's not the first time inquiry of a kind comes to us. So I'm just asking this out loud as an inquiry of my own. Before one goes into this, there needs to be some kind of steadfast connection. So one can be in some kind of assurance that there would be connection, further guidance, reassurance, lifeline support. Don't know. I'm just puzzled. I can't be puzzling. Not correct English. And yes, of course, people came from all various walks of life with these inquiries over the years. And it's like our containers became this Red Cross battalion. That's what we were dubbed in earlier years. That everything that happened somewhere wrong, come on guys, here we are. You know, this is like, I'm saying that with a slight sense of frustration, in a sense that this is not how we see this work for ourselves, not how we foresaw it. But if that is what's happening, inquiry like that can only be truly addressed and redressed in the setting. So in the case of this inquiry, I would recommend this lady to find her way to join our live programs. She's a single mother, I understand, so reach out, you know, like we often offer scholarships, partial scholarships, but it's not for me to speak on behalf of the team. We are an organization, right? We have different departments, and these decisions are made not by me, but they are made by team of dedicated people, yes, like yourself including there. But like that, in an inquiry, what can be done, right?
Yes, I think it's more of a general inquiry. I mean, just to reiterate a few of the points, I wasn't a seeker, as you alluded to that already. I only loved art and literature, so they had a literary background, but they don't elaborate on how Shaktipat was received other than it was in an unforeseen way. So
I see. Well, so okay, let's not dramatize, and let's maybe make sure that we somehow instill instead encouragement. The great reminder is that you are your own power. No one can take away your power. Shaktipat is a transmission of spiritual power. So, the transmission of spiritual power meant to empower us, not disempower us. Yes, sometimes we met with challenges because the transmission of any kind brings us closer to what otherwise we were not able to face. So that's also true. So sometimes there are phases that we need to face and face off gracefully, go through them. Providing, of course, nothing sinister happened. And I hope this is not the case. But it is also for me to say that there are plenty of examples when people undergone through some kind of spiritual, so-called would-be spiritual treatment of transmission of divine energy, where the container itself that's supposed to be acting as the conduit is not fit to do that job. It's simply not fit to carry out that job. So this could come with complications. And to deal with these complications in the form of this kind of online inquiry, I don't see possible, except, of course, in aligning yourself with beings of light whom you connect at the level where your heart have that resonance, where you sense that intuitively I can trust, and you can always plug into the field of these people, okay? I would even say as simple as having images, 1 or 2, 3, of the beings who truly resonate that wholesomeness. You see, there are always, from the past, not so distant past, if there are in the present, with whomever that resonance, already this would work at that purifying your environment. And of course, educate yourself what needs to be done in terms of grounding the energy and so forth. For that, we have our facilitators. If you cannot come to our immersions, you can certainly book a session with qualified facilitators in our work from whatever angle that this needs to be addressed or redressed. Because you'd be surprised how everything interconnected. You pull this thread and you adjust it at another end. Sometimes just bringing harmony back into our functioning of neurophysiology makes wonders. Sometimes understanding something fills those voids, these unpleasant, let's say, black holes in understanding, or gray areas. You see? But since in this inquiry, not really much, forgive me, meat on the bone for me to cook it further, I would simply rest it at that. Okay? But I will encourage you to find your way into live programs with us or with whomever you find that hard resonance, intuitive inside that yes, and you go there consciously. So no more of this what was like unprecedented or unseen circumstances. So it's done consciously on your part rather than some result of accident. Okay? All right, folks. I guess we should say thank you, everyone who joined us in this beautiful, I wish you can see those online, live, this magnificent setting on a long summer night, day, but shortest night, longest day. Okay? And I don't know if you want to say some closing words.
Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. It's been a pleasure to host you, and thank you, Igor, for your illuminating and profound responses. And yeah, hopefully we'll see everyone again soon. So conclude that for now. Thank you.
Thank you all.